Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. This is part 3 of the Teddy Atlas story. Really excited to bring you this next chapter of Teddy Atlas's career and the life and the stories and the great moments that he has had, because he's had such a storied life and storied career within the sport of boxing. He's had to be separated and split down to multiple parts. Now, this is part 3. There is one more final part after this one to be delivered next week. But this part really focuses on his relationship with Donny LaLonde and how he came to be with Donny LaLonde and train him. And then it moves from the Donny LaLonde saga over to then Michael Moorer. And we all go up to the point where Michael Moorer looks to go ahead and capture the World Heavyweight Championship from Evander Holyfield. So in between that time, you've got some great stories about what Teddy was doing, how he was training people. We've got a certain famous actor who he trained for a very, very notable film. So it's going to be really good to go through all of these great stories for this chapter of Teddy Atlas's career profile. I want to say thanks, first of all, to everybody for listening to the show, for listening to this season so far. We hope you've enjoyed the first couple of episodes, and we hope you're enjoying the Teddy Atlas career profile. And if you've already let us know what you think about it, thank you. If you haven't, please do go and let us know on Spotify in the comments section. If you've listened/watched on YouTube, you can drop a comment below in the section. It would really be appreciated if you do let us know your thoughts and feelings on the episode. A big shout out to the patrons, of course, because they are supporting us by providing us that little financial incentive to be able to produce more brilliant content like this. But in return, we are giving it to them earlier than everybody else. So if you want to explore becoming a patron, check us out at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast. Okay, so now let's go back to the end of part 2. And we were talking about who now had entered the fray. That was a certain Donny LaLonde. Now, during the time Teddy was in the midst of training Chris in the mid-1980s, Donny LaLonde contacted him. LaLonde was a Canadian fighter who was managing himself and promoting his own fights with the help of Top Rank. He possessed a hard right hand, but he wasn't much of a stylist. He had tried to turn himself into the next Golden Boy by bleaching his hair blonde. In fact, he even called himself the Golden Boy. He called Teddy one day with an appeal for help. He said, "I'm Donny LaLonde. Would you train me?" Teddy retorted sharply and he said, "I'm Teddy Atlas, and no, I won't." Donny persisted, calling Teddy again and again a few days later. He said, "I'm here in New York. I flew here at my own expense. Would you at least see me?" Teddy was at Gleason's. He clearly remembers the day when he recounted it, and he said, "It was about 5:30 in the afternoon. I was getting ready to leave. It was the end of a long day, and I was tired. I said, 'If you can be here in half an hour, I'll see you.' He must have taken a cab. He showed up 15 minutes later. I was still of the mindset to say no because I didn't think he was serious or for real. But it meant something that he was coming to me, that he had flown to New York. I decided to suspend judgment until I heard what he had to say. When we went downstairs to the basement of Gleason's, where I had an office, so we could talk privately, LaLonde was slight of build. He had that bottle blonde hair, which went along with what I knew about him, that he was a bit of a con man and a self-promoter, and that he was more proficient at that than he was at fighting. Lou Duver, among others, had told me that he would never amount to much, but I always trusted my own instincts, and I wanted to see for myself. "I want a chance to be a real fighter, and I know that you're a teacher," Donny LaLonde said. "I've heard a lot of things about you, that you're a pro, and you do things right, and you force people to face things and accomplish things, and I've never had that." Well, Teddy kept listening. Donny LaLonde was saying all the right things to Teddy to keep listening. He said, "I don't want to be a sideshow, a circus anymore. I want to be the real thing, and I'm willing to put myself in your hands and let myself be taken where you tell me to go. You can manage me, you can do everything, and I'm willing to risk finding out that I'm not good enough. But if that's the case, at least I'll know that." He had a bad left arm from a hockey injury when he was a kid. He had a pin in his shoulder. The handicap was mostly psychological at this point, but favouring the left for years meant there was physical and technical ground to make up. Teddy decided to take him on anyway. At first, he wanted Teddy to manage him, but Teddy said, "No, I don't think that'll work." Teddy carried on and he said, I'll get you a guy. I need to concentrate on training you. I'll get you a guy who's the right guy for you, who'll be able to market your personality and who's a good fit. At the time, Teddy was thinking of Dave Wolf, who managed Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Teddy knew him from training another one of his fighters, Donny LaLonde, a tough little Canadian welterweight. When Teddy approached Wolf about LaLonde, he said, This guy's nothing. What are you wasting your time for? Well, Teddy had already told him he'd take him on, and he said to him, I'm training him. Well, if you're training him, you must see something, was the response. Michael Spinks is about to give up the light heavyweight title, and that's going to open up 3 titles. It's going to be a free-for-all. And after I train this kid for a while, I think he can figure in the picture. He can punch, and he can be marketed. And if he's managed the right way, he can be moved into one of those spots, because it won't be a great guy in there. Well, Wolf saw the possibilities in this. He was a guy who could manoeuvre and market fighters like he had done with Mancini. He knew how to put a guy in the right spot to make the most of his talent. Well, Wolf replied and he said, OK, I'll manage him. Teddy then set up a meeting for the 3 men, whereby an arrangement was made, and they shook on a deal. The association was beset by nefarious forces from the off, and this was much to Teddy's disliking. He said, not long after this meeting, a manager who I won't identify, except to say he was supposedly Meyer Lansky's first cousin, tried to lure LaLonde away from Wolf. This manager was around a lot of wise guys, including Sonny Franceschi, and when he saw me training LaLonde at Gleason's, he approached him. No matter what's said now, LaLonde was going to sign with him. The guy made a bunch of promises, and LaLonde was swayed. When I found out, I was furious. You son of a bitch, I said to LaLonde. Well, it's not like I've signed a contract with Wolf, or anything. He has been putting you up in his apartment, Teddy replied. He has been buying your meals, he's been taking care of you. Donny LaLonde's response was, yeah. Teddy couldn't hide his anger. Why do you think he was doing that? Because he likes you? Because it's Adopt a Canadian week? You have an agreement. I don't give a fuck if you didn't sign the paper. You have an agreement. Now sign a fucking agreement with him tomorrow, or you get another fucking trainer and get the fuck out of my life. Well, he signed an agreement the next day. It was ironic, because Teddy had never signed a contract himself, and 2 years later, Wolf, the guy that he'd stood up for, well, he fucked Teddy over. But before that happened, and all the subsequent things, Teddy then explains what he did, spending that time working with Wolf, building up LaLonde's confidence. He said, I did a lot of technical stuff with him, hours and hours a day, working on his left hand, teaching him not to pull straight back to get away from punches, turning him into a more complete fighter. We brought him along slowly, taking him to small arenas, in nothing places, and getting him the right kinds of fights. We got him a fight in Enid, Oklahoma, right after Thanksgiving one year. I wasn't making a dime on the fight, but I went into the gym on Thanksgiving Day to train LaLonde. This was one of the things later, when I thought about my sacrifices that I had made for these guys, that really bothered me the most. My son, Teddy Atlas III, was 3 years old then, the cutest little kid in the world. He had never been to the Thanksgiving Day parade, and I had promised him that we'd go. Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, I got my father, as old as he was, to come into the city with me and little Teddy. I didn't have the money to drive in because I couldn't afford to park the car. I didn't tell my father that. I just told him that we'd take the subway because I did it all the time, and it was easier. We went into the city, up to Gleason's, then I said goodbye and sent them off to the parade, while I stayed to open up the gym. I still remember the way my son looked with his little green wool cap and his cheeks red and shiny from the cold. Teddy's father was in his shabby white raincoat, an old man who was a good man to be tromping around the city on a cold day. I should have said, fuck Donny LaLonde, and gone to the parade with him. But Teddy was being pro, the same way his father had been. I opened the gym, and it was freezing. The heat was off because of the holiday, and I waited for LaLonde to show up. I trained him until they came back. 2 days later, LaLonde and I went to Enid, Oklahoma, and he knocked out this Mexican fighter who came up to about his belly button. I felt so sorry for the poor guy, because I knew what he had gotten paid. Then I went back to the locker room after Wolf and LaLonde packed up, and we were leaving, and I gave him $20. I never told them what I was doing, because they would have looked at it as weakness. I think I just said, I forgot something, and I went back to the locker room, and the guy was just sitting there, still bleeding from a cut over his eye. I handed him a $20 bill. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But I knew why the guy was taking the fight. He had kids at home. I saw the kids at the weigh-in. He'd even had to borrow another guy's cup. He was sad. $20 wasn't much, but it was all I had. We fought a bunch of fights like that, bringing LaLonde along slowly against guys who we used to build up his confidence. He was so full of doubts and insecurities. I took him to the doctors to confirm that what I was trying to tell him about using his shoulder was true, that he wouldn't hurt it. I also spent a lot of time in the ground floor apartment at 50 Barrow Street in the West Village that Dave Wolfe was lending him, trying to convince LaLonde that leaving Canada and coming here was going to pay off. LaLonde would even call Teddy in the middle of the night sometimes, and Teddy would have to talk him off the ledge. It just wasn't working with LaLonde in the gym. It was a round-the-clock job. LaLonde constantly wanted reassurance from Teddy that it was going to work out, so Teddy would have to talk to him about being a pro. He'd have to tell him all the reasons he thought he was going to make it. The defining moment in his development came one day while he was sparring with Johnny Walker Banks, and Banks hit him in the balls. Teddy had been working with LaLonde for months now. Although he'd come quite a way, Teddy wasn't sure if they would get further or if they'd ever get him where he needed to go. Johnny Walker Banks was a great gym fighter and a regular sparring partner for Marvin Hagler. He was a monster when he had the safety of headgear and big gloves, but he fell apart in an arena under the lights. So Teddy put LaLonde in with him as a test. Teddy knew that Banks was tough, but he thought that LaLonde had an edge because he was a light heavyweight and Banks was only a middleweight. Sure enough, LaLonde was using his strength to his advantage, leaning on Banks and clubbing him with right hands. Banks, being the old gym rat that he was, knew exactly what he was doing when he hit LaLonde in the balls. It was no accident. LaLonde started to slow down, though he didn't stop entirely. Now the old Gleason's was quite a place. There were 2 rings and a balcony up above, paint peeling off the walls. The floors were seasoned with spit and blood and sweat. It was a gym with atmosphere and character to spare. Characters, too. All these old-timers hanging around, ready to share their stories and knowledge. Well, on that particular day, the whole place was watching LaLonde and Banks in the main ring, including Freddie Brown, a great cutman and one of Roberto Duran's trainers, who was about 80 years old at this point. He used to tell Teddy, "Don't let the managers and fighters fuck you, 'cause they will. They're all pimps and whores." Well, when Banks hit LaLonde with a second low blow, LaLonde stopped fighting entirely. Teddy got right up on the ring apron and climbed through the ropes. "What you doing?" "I'm in pain." "You're in pain? Come here." "That's why I stopped. Come here." Well, he walked towards Teddy, and everyone's watching. "This is it," he said. "You listen to me right now, or you go across the street to Penn Station and get the fuck back to Canada and let me forget all the time you've wasted in my life." Donny LaLonde looked at Teddy, and he started to talk, but Teddy cut him off. He said, "You turn around and you go hit him in the balls right now. You go over there and you hit him in the fucking balls and become a fighter, or you get on the next train and you get the fuck out of my life." The whole gym stopped cold. All the old-timers, all the kids, Freddie Brown, everyone. It was one of those moments of frozen time where you see someone having to make a decision about what kind of man they want to be. The next time Teddy would be a part of a moment like that came in the Maura Holyfield fight. This moment was almost like a prelude to that one. Teddy had no hesitation making demands of LaLonde. He had given his whole Thanksgiving up for him. He had disappointed his son for him. He took in the words that Teddy gave him, and then he turned around. He walked back towards Banks, and he hit him square in the balls. Freddie Brown let out a little "whoa." Well, he shocked everyone. LaLonde and Banks continued fighting through 2 more rounds. LaLonde punching the shit out of Banks the whole time. There was no more hitting in the balls. Banks never threw a low punch again. That was the day LaLonde became a fighter. Of course, you don't really know about somebody until they've been tested. Cus D'Amato had drilled the concept into Teddy over and over, and Teddy believed it, even though Cus himself had come up short when he was tested. In the case of LaLonde and Wolfe, their relationship and loyalty to Teddy was tested by a situation that involved Wolfe and another one of his fighters, Donny LaLonde, who was taking Wolf to court to break his contract. LaLonde claimed that Wolf had been dishonest over their deal, causing him to want to void his contract. With the date of the case looming, Wolf asked Teddy if he would be a witness at the hearing. He said, "This guy's smearing my reputation. I just want the truth to come out." "Okay, I'll tell the truth if that's what you want," Teddy offered, "but don't ask me to do anything beyond that." "That's fine," Wolf replied. "That's all I want." Come the morning of the hearing, Teddy arrived at the Boxing Commissioner's office, situated on Lower Broadway. Wolf was out in the hall with his lawyer, who was beckoned in an expensive suit. Meanwhile, according to Teddy, LaLonde showed up with his lawyer, who was actually a veterinarian. The guy had graduated from law school and had a law degree, but had gone on to become a vet instead. He was also one of the white-collar crew at Gleason's, which is the way LaLonde had met him, and he was a bit of a nut too, always looking to fight tough guys who could punch him around. As a result, his nose was all bent and busted up. It was like a badge of honour or something. One time he got in the ring with Roberto Duran, who was there training, and Duran didn't give a shit that he wasn't a real fighter, and he knocked him out. So here was LaLonde's veterinarian/lawyer smelling of animals from being in his vet's office all the time. A guy I wouldn't bring my dog to, much less try to get legal help from. And all the punches he'd taken at Gleason's certainly weren't improving his memory of case law. Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, there was Wolf's freaking $400 an hour lawyer, with his sullen tan and a Paco Rabanne aftershave. When Wolf saw Teddy, he came over, foaming at the mouth, saying, "I'm gonna fuck this Canuck against the fucking wall. I'm gonna tear his fucking liver out." It was crazy. He was talking like a madman, like a guy who was way too vengeful for his own or anyone else's good. Teddy's instincts told him, just by the way he was talking, that this went beyond anything normal or rational, and he said, "Don't try screwing this kid, Dave. I'm telling you, I don't even want to be here, so don't try anything funny. Don't lie about him, and do not put me in a position where you're trying to get me to support some lie." The four men ventured into a hearing room that was like a mini courtroom with an elevated platform, a witness box, and an uncomfortable wooden chair. Teddy was sworn in, and Wolf's lawyer started firing off questions. "Did Dave Wolf do a good job as a manager?" "Yes," Teddy replied. "What constitutes doing a good job?" Teddy responded thoughtfully, and he said, "Well, when LaLonde got with him, he wasn't rated, and under Wolf's guidance, he moved up to number 5 in the USBA. Wolf got him a Canadian title shot, so he did a good job. In your expert opinion as a trainer?" "Yes." Suddenly, the lawyer dropped the bombshell. He said, "Okay, Teddy, let's cut to the chase. You've said that Dave Wolf's a good manager. Why are we here today?" Teddy snapped back with thought. "I don't know. Why are we here? Aren't we here because Donny LaLonde asked Dave Wolf to do something that was impossible for Dave Wolf to do?" "What are you talking about? Isn't it true," continued the lawyer for the defence, "that the real issue here and the real problem, the reason we're here, is that Donny LaLonde asked Dave Wolf to get him drugs, and Wolf refused?" Teddy explained, "This is how treacherous Wolf was. LaLonde was a messed up kid, no doubt about it. He had fractured his kneecap when he was younger, another Canadian with a scar from an ice hockey mishap, and he had gotten addicted to Percocet, a powerful painkiller. Wolf knew about it because the kid had been honest with him. Now Wolf's lawyer was using that information. Didn't Donny LaLonde tell you? He said to me that he asked Dave Wolf to get him drugs, and Dave Wolf refused. No, I wasn't going to be a part of it. I wasn't going to help him take this kid down in this way." The lawyer was momentarily thrown by my refusal to cooperate. He gathered himself, pointing a finger in the air as if gauging the direction of the wind. "All right," he said. "Let me rephrase that." "No," I said again before he could continue. "I'm just going to put it in different terminology." "No," I said. "Well, hey, what part of no do you not understand? No. I don't care how many freaking ways you want to ask me. Could you please instruct the witness to answer only what he has asked?" "Maybe someone will instruct you to stop lying," I said. The whole room was murmuring now. "Mr. Atlas, please," the arbitrator pleaded. This guy's trying to get me to say something untrue, I said. I looked at the lawyer with contempt. I know what you're doing. You can phrase it any way you want to phrase it, and the answer will still be no. By the time I was excused, the room was in a complete uproar. I walked out of there, and nobody on Wolf's side would look at me. I understood what it meant, that they were going to take LaLonde from me. I had no contract. I knew. The next day, Teddy went to Gleason's. He was scheduled to work with LaLonde, only he never showed up. Teddy didn't bother calling him. He wasn't going to beg or crawl. Fuck him, and fuck them, he said. Teddy knew what was right and wrong. He had warned Wolf not to try and make him lie on the witness stand, and Wolf hadn't listened. It wasn't complicated to Teddy. There were no subtleties to the situation. LaLonde was getting $200 a week from Wolf, plus the apartment at 50 Barrow Street. When forced to choose, of course it's going to be easier for him to go with Wolf. He had gotten what he wanted from me. At least, what he thought he had, Teddy said. I'd built up his confidence, taught him how to use the left hand, and brought him to the next level. Less than a week after the hearing, Teddy discovered that his instincts were correct. Wolf had hired LaLonde a new trainer, Tommy Gallagher, a former policeman. Though it was expected, the betrayal stung. Teddy had been offered a job with boxing manager Josephine Abercrombie that would have provided him with sorely needed financial security and peace of mind. Abercrombie was one of the richest women in the country. She was new to boxing, but she brought a lot of money to the table. One weekend, she flew Teddy down to Houston on a private jet to facilitate a proposal. She wanted Teddy to train her newly acquired stable of fighters. She housed state-of-the-art facilities, a thoroughly modern setting. By the end of proceedings, Teddy was offered a job, a house, and all the trappings of success. It was an offer that would have alleviated the financial strain on Teddy, but accepting would have required Teddy to leave LaLonde. He said no. Teddy said, I don't want it to blow up into something that it wasn't. But I wouldn't have been able to bring LaLonde with me to Houston because Wolf had a problem with one of the people in Abercrombie's organisation, Jeff Levine. So I said no. I felt obligated to my commitment. Not long after, and for the same reason, I turned down an offer from the Duvers to train some of their stable, which included Vinny Pazienza, Meldrick Taylor, and Pernell Whitaker. Months went by after that day at the Boxing Commission with Wolf and Poole. Teddy was barely making it. Elaine and Teddy and the kids were living month by month, never able to get ahead, always just scraping by. Meanwhile, in 1987, LaLonde fought Eddie Davis for the vacant WBC light heavyweight title. Teddy watched the fight with a sports writer, Wallace Matthews, and Nick Baffey, and some other guys at the sporting club on Hudson Street. And just as Teddy has predicted that day, he approached Wolf about him being LaLonde's manager. LaLonde won the title. He knocked out Davis, who was 40 years old and shot in 2 rounds. Teddy said he probably shouldn't have watched. It was just fuel for Teddy's anger. But I guess that's why he partly watched. LaLonde had a second good payday a few months later, defending the title against another shot fighter, Leslie Stewart. Teddy ran into LaLonde around that time. He was in the city, on his way to the Felt Forum, and he was walking across the street with somebody. He saw Teddy, and Teddy saw him. LaLonde was in a white suit, and Teddy began walking in his direction, right towards him. LaLonde didn't know how to react. He started to say something trying to gauge Teddy's intent, but Teddy didn't say a word. Teddy just kept walking towards him. When he got about 15 feet away, he turned and jogged away. Teddy didn't chase him or anything, but he was right to run. Dave Wolf was smart. He managed LaLonde beautifully, matching him against the right guys. He orchestrated his career like a maestro. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow was the Sugar Ray Leonard fight. Leonard, who was no dummy himself, saw in LaLonde a guy that would allow him to move up in weight so that he could add another championship belt to his legacy. LaLonde got $6 million for that fight, which he lost on a 9th round TKO. Teddy's share would have been around about $600,000. It's funny, with Tyson, he never really thought about the money. For one thing, for Teddy, it wasn't real to him when he left Catskill. He was young. He couldn't really envision that kind of payoff at that point. For Teddy, it had the same reality as a lottery ticket. Then, when it did happen, when Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, Cus was already dead. So that changed how Teddy felt. He could have dwelled on the millions that Tyson made, that Rooney made. But as much as possible, he didn't let himself go there. LaLonde was different. When he got the $6 million for the Leonard fight, it tore Teddy up. It made him want to kill LaLonde. He had sacrificed for him, and in return, LaLonde had betrayed him. The idea that he should be rewarded for that, well, it made him murderous. Teddy said himself, "I'm not proud to say that. I understand that we live in a society of laws. I understand all that. But at the time, I simply felt he no longer had a right to live." It's hard for me to remember the exact moment I decided I was going to kill Donny LaLonde. My anger just kept festering and growing. It didn't go away. I realised it wouldn't until I did something. I got a gun. On a cold, rainy night in December of 1988, Teddy drove into the city with a friend. The friend, who he named as Tony because he didn't want to reveal his identity, came with Teddy because he felt like he needed to be with him. Teddy and Tony had felt the same way, that they were due to be paid. Tony was Teddy's friend, and he was also angry for him. So they parked the car blocks away from LaLonde's apartment. They were very careful not to open the car doors until they could get out without being seen. They were both hooded, in sweatshirts, and Teddy had the gun hidden in his waistband. He said, "We walked through the rain to 50 Barrow Street. There was a gate out front. I told Tony to wait. I went through the gate, and there was a door with a row of mailboxes and buzzers on the wall next to it. I rang one of the buzzers. No answer, so I tried another. 'Who is it?' It was an elderly woman's voice. 'I'm a friend of Donny's. Are you one of the ones that was making all the noise the other night?' Despite the admonishment, there was a pleasant quality to her voice. I could tell there was something I could work with in that voice. 'No, ma'am,' I said. 'Ma'am wasn't a form of address I used ordinarily, but I knew just how to use it.' 'Oh, well, you sound like a nice fella. Do you want to go in?' 'Yes, ma'am,' Teddy replied. The buzzer sounded, and Teddy pushed open the door. LaLonde's apartment was on the first floor, so he walked down the short hallway, which was dimly lit and had a dingy green flowered wallpaper. He got to the familiar door of LaLonde's apartment, and he thought all of the nights he'd come over to talk to him, through his doubts and through his fears. So Teddy pulled out the gun, and he knocked. If LaLonde had opened the door, he would have been dead. At this point, nobody had seen Teddy. The old lady upstairs had heard a disembodied voice, nothing more. Teddy had gloves on, so there were no fingerprints. It would have been easy and clean. He could have pulled the trigger, turned around and walked away. Only, LaLonde wasn't home. Thank God, of course, Teddy wasn't thinking at the time, and he didn't give up that easily. He went back out, but first he jammed up the door bolt with a matchbook cover so it wouldn't lock. Tony was waiting in the rain across the street, so Teddy crossed over. Tony said, "You take care of it." "He's not there," Teddy replied. "What do you want to do?" "We'll wait." There was a phone booth a couple of blocks away, near a deli, so they stood under the awning of the deli out of the rain. Every 20 minutes, Teddy walked over to the phone, dropped a dime in, and tried calling. Even though it had been nearly 2 years since he'd called that number regularly, he remembered it. 11 o'clock came and went, then 12, then 1, and he kept calling. At 2 a.m, LaLonde's girlfriend answered, so Teddy put the neck of his sweatshirt over the mouthpiece to mask his voice. "Donny there?" "Yeah, hold on a minute." There was a rustling sound as the phone was handed over. "Hello?" It was LaLonde. Teddy hung up. Tony looked at him as he ducked back under the awning. I guess the expression from Teddy told Tony everything. "Let's go." So they started walking. Teddy explains, "My heart was thumping hard. I heard this rushing sound in my ears. It was so loud and distorted everything else around, as if I was underwater or in a plane taking off. Behind it was just the usual sounds of the city. Car tyres on the wet asphalt, people's voices, a horn, but I couldn't seem to hear them right. I wasn't hearing things the normal way. When we got to LaLonde's block, I saw the gate outside, number 50, and I started to get cold. I began shivering. I was thinking about the girl who had answered the phone, LaLonde's girl. I was thinking that I was probably going to have to kill her too, because I couldn't be seen. If I got lucky and LaLonde came to the door, I could shoot him, and maybe I could get away without her seeing me. It was a small apartment. I didn't know how it was going to go. There was a chance I wouldn't have to kill her. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. Thinking about LaLonde's blonde girlfriend, I flashed on Nicole. I thought about my daughter, my beautiful 5-year-old daughter. Then I thought about my son. As I thought about them, I remembered what had happened on Christmas Eve after I put them to bed. It was strange the ways the anger came out. LaLonde fought Leonard back in November, and I stopped being able to sleep. Every night lying there in the dark, I could feel my jaw clenched and my teeth grinding. Then one night, a few days before Christmas, I was in a bar. This big skinhead was shouting his mouth off. He was a Hitler Youth guy. I didn't even know what that was at the time, but I knew what he was saying. He was drunk, and he was saying, all the Jews should have been killed. And I said, my father's Jewish. The odd thing is that although I never had exactly hidden the fact I was half Jewish, I'd never been open about it either. Because I was raised Catholic, everyone assumed I was Irish, and I never made a point of correcting that assumption. Now here I was, after all the problems I'd had with my father growing up, turning to this guy and saying, my father's Jewish. Well, not surprisingly, it set him off. The guy came after him, which I guess is what Teddy wanted at the time. So Teddy smashes him in the face and messes him up bad. A few days later, on Christmas Eve, right after he puts his kids to bed, there's a knock on the door. It's a New York police detective. He wanted Teddy to go down to the station with him to answer some questions. It wasn't as bad as what it could have been, Teddy said. He was processed and fingerprinted and given a desk appearance ticket, which meant he had to return for the arraignment. But he got to go back home that night. Eventually, the problem went away entirely. His lawyer paid the skinhead's lawyer off on the steps of the courthouse with $7,500 that he had borrowed from a friend. In return, the guy didn't press charges. But before that, what Teddy remembers is sitting there with his kids on Christmas, not knowing what's going to happen. This thing hanging over him, and they were so happy, and they loved me so much. And Elaine said to him, you're throwing this all away because some jerk-off said something stupid. You're throwing this all away. Well, back to the LaLonde story, and halfway down the block, all the physical sensation had left him. The cold, the noise, the ringing in his ears, the rushing of blood, it all left him, and there was nothing. Hollowness, detachment, like he was dead, he said. And the world had ceased to exist. All his reservations were gone. He was going to do what he had come there to do. He got to the gate and he opened it. And then, in his head, he could hear Elaine again, crying the way she'd been crying on Christmas Day, saying, you might not be able to do this with us no more. Teddy wanted to kill him so bad, so bad, and the faces of his kids kept flashing before his eyes, and he turned to Tony. Tony looked at him expectantly, and he shook his head, and he started walking away. Teddy, what? That's it? That's it? Teddy wished he could say the rage went away, but it wasn't that easy for him. He had to keep reminding himself of his responsibilities, thinking of the people who loved him and counted on him. He had to keep thinking about what would happen to them. Otherwise, he was lost. Now, over the course of 2 years, from 1986 to 1988, Teddy was involved in all sorts of little bits of work. And in 1987, well, that was the year that Teddy met Hollywood actor Willem DaFoe. DaFoe had sought Teddy's services as he needed a boxing trainer to help him prepare to play the role of a Jewish boxer in the movie Triumph of the Spirit. The film's producer, Arnold Kopslin, who had previously been involved with the Oscar-winning film Platoon, had contacted Mickey Duff, who had recommended Teddy in an echo of the Twyla Tharp episode of his life. After meeting and talking to William, Teddy was hired for a sum of $1,000 a week. The movie was based on the true story of Salalmo Arush, a Greek Jew from the Balkans who got sent to Auschwitz during World War II and literally had to fight for his life in boxing matches with other concentration camp inmates. The winner of the respective bouts might get an extra piece of bread so that he could live a bit longer, while the unfortunate loser was sent to their death. The challenge Teddy faced was to bring an actor in a period of a few months to a point whereby he would present as having proficiency as a real boxer. DaFoe was a tremendous actor, very thorough and committed in his approach, with an untamed desire to look as authentic in his learned craft as possible. William had never boxed previously, so was tutored in the basics. Teddy taught him how to hold his hands, how to throw the various punches, and how to move. Due to the importance that he be believable as a fighter from the 1940s, Teddy examined old fight films to prepare William for his assignment. William worked very hard, absorbing things quickly, and Teddy was impressed with this, and this is what he said. Even though he had no background as a fighter, he was a real professional. You can recognise that quality in anybody if they have it. I had already seen it with Twyla. It was interesting. I would never have guessed that I'd see a parallel between the kind of toughness and discipline that my world required and what was needed to be a professional actor or dancer. But William and Twyla both opened up my eyes in that way. William was a guy who believed in the spiritual side of life. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and took pride in his profession. He was a purist who did all this stuff outside of Hollywood for the Wooster Group, which was an avant-garde theatre company. His work with them reminded me of my work in the gym with the amateurs, where it was just a matter of being committed and not with hopes of money or glory. William was almost embarrassed about his big Hollywood movies. He said, "I just do them so I can afford to do the stuff I really love." He was constantly on a quest for knowledge, going off on retreats to meditate. He was trying to find a higher place, and he thought I knew some things. During the time I was training him, we had dinner frequently and talked about big questions. One time he said, "I'm having trouble with the truth." "The truth is just an exercise," I said. He loved that. He loved the sound of it. "Tell me exactly." "Like, how much truth can you stand?" I said. "How much can you lift? How many reps can you do?" "Yeah, I never thought about it that way before," DaFoe said, "but that makes a lot of sense to him." Though William was not actually going to fight in the movie, the boxing scenes of course were choreographed, Teddy felt it was important that he get into the ring and experience what it felt like to be hit, and to be hit hard. And he agreed. Teddy put a mask on him. Now that mask was a mask that I won't tell anybody had gotten custom made for Chris Reed, because Chris used to get cut a lot in filming. So they did some sparring, and there's no doubt that it gave DaFoe a feel for what it was really like to be in a ring with another fighter in actual combat. Teddy said, "We were training 3 hours a day in the middle of the day, and by the time William arrived each afternoon at Gleason's, he had already been up since 4 in the morning, because he was also rehearsing a play that he was doing with the Wooster Group at the Performing Garage. I guess he started to get a bit run down from it all. I noticed at a certain point that he was looking a little ragged. He was such a pro that he never said anything. William didn't know if what he was feeling was sickness or mental fatigue, and because he wasn't sure, he refused to capitulate. That pretty much defines a pro for me, someone who will not allow himself the out of thinking that there is something wrong, because then there is a tendency to give in or formulate an excuse. It was up to me as a professional trainer and teacher to recognise if something was wrong. Well, when he finished the cruise movie, William travelled to Poland to begin working on Triumph of the Spirit. He invited Teddy to go with him, thinking it's important that his training continued throughout the filming of the picture, as well as deciding that Teddy should choreograph the fight scenes. Teddy said, "At that point, the producers hadn't hired anyone. I had no idea what I should ask for in terms of money. I had been getting $1,000 a week to train him in New York, but this was going to be a full-time job and much more responsibility. I was going to have to be away from my family for more than a month." William and I discussed it. He'd asked around, and we came up with a $4,000 a week figure, albeit on the high end. He said, "Call Arnold and work it out with him." "You don't think it'll be a problem?" I said. "No, you're going to get that because I'm going to back you up. To be honest, you could ask for whatever you want, and you would get it." William, who had just made a breakthrough in his career with Platoon, was getting $1 million to star in this particular film, so he had real clout. Teddy went to Copsland. He didn't have an agent or a lawyer, and he told him what he wanted. And he said, "Why would you ask for that much?" "I guess you figure, why not?" Coppelson had worked in the garment industry before Hollywood, and he had that rag trade mentality that everybody was a hustler. Well, it hit Teddy the wrong way, him saying that. It offended him. I said, I don't fucking do that. I don't make a price just to make a price. I got to be away from my family and work for a month. And that's a fair price for what the job is, and if you don't think so, well, you can go and get someone else. Teddy said, well, he got very quiet at that point, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. William, meanwhile, had already gone over to Poland. When I talked to him, I told him what had happened, and he went to see Coppelson, who told him that he had decided to use the stunt coordinator to choreograph the fight scenes instead of me. Teddy's asking for too much money, Coppelson explained. William got very upset with him. He threatened to go home if Arnold didn't change his mind. I think it even got to the point of him making play reservations. Coppelson got in touch with me at that point and he said, Teddy, I think that we've had some kind of misunderstanding. He told me that he had always wanted me to work on the movie, and of course he'd pay me what I was asking for. When Teddy arrived in Poland, everyone there seemed to know that there had been some drama involved. Teddy was a little bit naive and he didn't realise stuff like this took place on movie sets all the time. Poland was still an Iron Curtain country at this point. It was a bleak place, very poor. You had people working on conveyor belts in factories for $30 a month. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of vodka, and people passed out on the sidewalks. They didn't use much oil heat, so people made coal fires to stay warm, and the sky was dark with smoke and soot. The production was giving us these Polish zloty for our per diems, handing it out like it was monopoly money, which in a way it was, because they had gotten a black market rate of exchange of something like 3,000 zloty to $1. The waiters in the hotel where we were staying were making nothing, and I was giving them huge tips. Edward James Olmos, one of the actors in the movie, gave me a hard time about it. He said I was throwing off the whole economy. He was serious. He wasn't kidding. I said, what the heck are you talking about, Eddie? There's no economy here. You're tipping them 3 months' salary in a day, he said. Yeah? So what's your point? When we leave, there's going to be a big crash. A crash? They crashed here a long time ago. This country's in ruins. But it'll make them feel bad when we leave. Hey, at least, while we're here, they'll feel good, I said. Anyway, we disagreed about it, and that was that. I kept leaving big tips. It was the funniest thing, though. One day, we were in the hotel, restaurant, me, William, and Costas Mandalore, and where were all the waiters? Well, they were at our table. Meanwhile, Eddie was at another table, looking for a waiter going, waiter, waiter. Even at the best hotel in the city, some amenities were hard to get, like toilet paper. So when the maid came by to the room, Teddy gave her $20 bills, which was unheard of. You remembered that old Frank Sinatra commercial with the towels? That's how it was with Teddy and the toilet paper. It was like a freaking toilet paper store in his room. Nobody else in the whole hotel had toilet paper. Teddy had it all. People were coming up to him, saying, Teddy, I hear you have the toilet paper. I was wondering if I could get a roll. And Teddy's response would be, no, I'm sorry, can't help you. Teddy, come on, just a few sheets. William and Teddy trained very hard during the month that Teddy resided in Poland. He served a dual purpose. Firstly, to make William into a believable fighter. 2, to script and choreograph all the fight scenes in the movie. William was not responding well to training. He was exhibiting nerves, though the fighter-coach relationship was a healthy one. Teddy said, he was getting a little funny with me. We were close, and he was always respectful of me, but he started to get a bit nervous, and that made him resistant to some of the things I was telling him. It was like a fighter looking for an excuse not to fight. He wanted to look like a fighter, but wasn't sure he was looking like one. Frequently, when you're doing a thing, you're only aware of the way you feel. You connect the way you feel with the way you must look. If you feel inhibited, which people often do when they're performing difficult and demanding tasks, especially physical ones, and you feel you must be the way you look. You don't realise that you look fine. William was starting to fall into a bad way of thinking in that regard. It was making him trust me a little bit less, because he was worried I wasn't telling him the truth. One day, when his mood was particularly negative, I grabbed hold of him. I looked him in the face. I could smell something coming out of his pores. Smoke. He'd been smoking cigarettes. He was so nervous and stressed that he didn't realise what that meant, that he was actually undermining himself, contributing to his worries about his credibility. Would his character smoke cigarettes, knowing that he was going into the ring and if he lost he would die? he would put a shotgun into his mouth before he would do that. He would eat razor blades. Yet here was DaFoe doing something his character would never do. "You've been smoking," I said. "How do you know that?" "Never mind how I know. I know." And I looked him right in the eyes. I didn't care that he was a movie star and that you're not supposed to act in a certain way with movie stars if you want to stay employed. Now, starting right fucking now, you ain't going to smoke no more. You ain't going to act like Salamo would act, and you're going to act like a pro. You know what he did? He looked at me and said, "Okay." And he never smoked another cigarette. From that moment on, we never had another day that came close to not being a great day. The choreography was a different sort of challenge for me. I had never done anything like that before. I had to sort of make it up as I went along. There was a scene where William gets into a fight with one of the Jewish trustees who were in their own way almost worse than the German guards. The fight takes place while the inmates are laying train rail up on the elevated mound. In the script, there was no description of the fight whatsoever. It was just left blank. So before shooting this scene, we went to the location to see how to do it. I was there with William and Robert Young, the director, and the director of photography, and the other actors. It was clear that the fight couldn't take place up by the tracks because there wasn't enough room. I decided that they could roll down the embankment and fight on flatter ground. That was how we would solve the problem. After we had gone over the actual physical specifics of the fight, I realised I had to have a way of making sure that it would be consistent, that it would be the same every time we shot it. Suddenly it hit me. I had to write out every step of it, every punch, every move. I wound up staying up all night to do it. I showed William what I'd done, and he said, "This is great. Now I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I'll be able to prepare for it." "Yeah, it's going to be just like a dance," I said. It was funny that I said that. Maybe unconsciously it came from Twyla. I'm not sure, but it was clear to me that was how it had to be done. Writing it out that way also made me feel more comfortable and confident. In a situation like that, if the people you're working with think you know what you're doing, and it's actually like you do know what you're doing. We rehearsed the fights in the movie every day, getting ready to shoot them. We got to the point where each fight was memorised down to the last punch. There was one particular fight that took place between William and this Polish actor. The Polish actor was a nice guy, but he was a big actor in Poland, and on this film, he just had this small part, so he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Physically, he was bigger than William, and he kept getting a little rough with him. It bothered me because William was my guy. I took William aside and I said, "Listen, this time when you step to the side, you hit him on the jaw." "You mean the shoulder, right?" I thought I'm supposed to hit him in the shoulder. That's what was in the script, and was the way we'd been doing it. "No, you're going to hit him in the jaw," Teddy said. "You sure?" "Yeah." "You're not a big puncher. You're not going to knock him out." William smiled and he said, "All right, you sure?" "Yeah." So they started shooting the scene. The Polish guy was moving forward with this little smirk because he'd been pushing William around. This time William stepped to the side and bang, hit the guy, and the guy went down. Teddy was watching through the monitor with the director, Bob Young. Suddenly, Teddy heard him asking me, "What's that in his mouth?" Teddy leaned in for a closer look. "That? Oh, it's nothing. Just a little blood." "Blood?" "Yeah, Bob, come on, it's not serious. Occasionally, you're going to miss a little. But he's fine." Well, William helped the Polish guy up, and it was a little bit like what had happened with Donny LaLonde and Johnny Walker Banks. The Polish guy kind of tapped William, and it was understood he wasn't going to be rough no more. At that moment, William looked over at me and winked. I clenched my fist, and I gave him a little fist shake down low. Well, as the weeks went by in Poland, Arnold Koppelson and Teddy would become closer, despite the initial tensions. Teddy said, "We'd eat lunch together on the set. Him, Robert Young, William, and some of the other actors and me. Arnold and Bob Young loved to hear my boxing stories, especially the stuff about the smokers in the Bronx. In fact, Arnold was interested in doing a TV series about the smokers, but the negotiations fell apart mainly because he was such a cheap bastard. The funny part is that on the movie, he came to recognise my worth. He saw that I was valuable and earning my keep. He even said to me one day, "You should have asked for more money, Teddy." That was his sense of humour. The biggest fight scene in the movie was one between William and this German prisoner, Klaus Silber. We were using fighters from the Polish Olympic team in the movie, and we still hadn't picked one to play Silber. Arnold and I were discussing it one day, and he said, "What about you, Teddy? You want to be in the movie?" "Me? Who could play it better than you? Just as long as you realise I'm not paying you anything extra." So Teddy smiled and he said, "Yeah, all right, I'll do it, free of charge. The only other thing is, you're going to have to shave your head." "Shave my head? Oh, that won't do." "Teddy, you've got to." "No fucking way, Arnold. I'm not shaving my head." But the thing about Arnold is once he made up his mind that he wanted something, he wouldn't let it go. He really wanted me to play Silver, and he was very upset that I wouldn't shave my head. He called up Mickey Duff and asked him to talk to me. So Mickey called me and he said, "Teddy, I hear you're doing great on this movie." "Yeah, Mick, things are going pretty good." "Arnold tells me he's asked you to be in the movie." "Yeah, it's true. He said he's asked you to shave your head, but you won't do it." "That's right." "Teddy, what are they paying you to work on that movie?" "Mick, do you know what they're paying me? $4,000 a week." "You want to know what I think?" For $4,000 a week, I'd shave my balls if they asked me. Eventually, I relented. I agreed to get the haircut. When it came time, the girl who was going to cut my hair was very cautious. The truth is, she was a little afraid of me. She used a pair of scissors instead of the clippers. She cut it short, but like a real haircut. With everyone else, she had just used the clippers and buzzed off all the hair. Not with me. When she was finished, she held up a mirror and she asked me, "How's that, Teddy?" I still had a pretty full head of hair, and I said, "Yeah, that's good." Arnold came into the room at that point, and his jaw dropped. He said, "What is this? A barber shop? This is Auschwitz." I had to hand it to him. He knew how to make me laugh. He knew how to deal with me. "Teddy, he didn't get the option in Auschwitz to say, just a little off the top." All right, I said. I looked at the hair cutter. She was in a tough spot between me and Arnold. "Go ahead," I said. "Take it all off. Don't worry about it." She buzzed it clean. When she was done, Arnold said, "Shit, no wonder you didn't want it all taken off." "Wow, I thought you were scary before." You could see all the scars on my head where I was hit by the tyre iron and all kinds of other nicks and dings. The night before the big fight scene, I wrote out the sequence of moves the way I had done with the others. This was the biggest fight, the most dramatic, the most hateful, a German and a Jew. I wrote it up so that I beat the crap out of William for most of the fight, and then in the end, William won. I showed it to Arnold the next morning, and he started reading it. Halfway through, he put it down and said, "Teddy, I love you, and I'd do anything for you, and I know you're underpaid, but at this point in the film, I cannot afford to throw out William and make you the star of the picture. William needs to win this fight." Arnold, just keep reading a little longer," he said. "You sure?" Yeah, just keep reading." He kept reading, and finally, he breathed a sigh of relief. "You had me worried," he said. "So, you like it?" "Yeah, I like it." Well, we began rehearsing a while later. Everything went well, but at the end of the fight, instead of going down, I had it so that my guy, Klaus, gets hung up on the ropes and keeps getting punched. He never goes down. Robert Young, the director, said, "It was very good, Ted. I like it a lot. There's only one thing. Say whatever you want to say." "No, it's good," he said. "It's just the end." "What about the end?" "I'm just wondering why you don't wind up on the canvas." "It's a character thing. See, this guy knows that if he loses, he's going to the chimney. Right? But he's been hit with so many punches. How does he stay up on the rope like that?" "Unconsciously. It's so entrenched." And I started going through this beautiful explanation that was detailed and deep, and I talked about this guy's humanity and his stubborn will to live. And Bob went, "Uh-huh." Arnold was in the background, and he hadn't said anything to that point. Suddenly, he cleared his throat. "Teddy, could I say something?" "Sure." "Do you think it's possible that you just don't want to go down?" "No, it's the guy. He thinks he's going to go to the chimneys." "Yeah, but he takes all those shots. Have you ever seen a guy take that many shots and not go down?" "Sure, absolutely." Nobody wanted to say anything. I guess I was intimidating, especially the way I looked with my head shaved. Finally, William said, "Don't you think it's just a little to do with you not wanting to go like a schmuck and me standing over you forever on the film?" No, I swear to God that's not it." Arnold said, "What if we pay you more to take the dive?" "Fuck you, Arnold," Teddy said. "I ain't taking a dive for no one." "So you admit it?" No. "All right. Well, maybe a little." I mean, suddenly I realised that they were right. I wasn't being honest with myself. I hadn't realised it, but it was true. All right, let's do it again, I said. So we went through the scene again, and we got to the point where I was supposed to go down. And again, I wouldn't go down. I couldn't. Arnold was shouting, just fall. Fall, come on. But I couldn't. I couldn't fall down. Arnold was beside himself. William was grinning, shaking his head. Teddy, I promise I won't tell anybody you took a dive. I don't know what it is. It's a crazy thing. He took all my willpower, but the next time we tried it, I made myself fall down. The whole place erupted. I got a standing ovation for falling. The funny postscript is that at one of the premieres, my young son Teddy said to William afterward, "You didn't knock out my dad. He let you win because you're the star." William smiled, and I looked over at him and shrugged like, what can I say? He's my son. So, a few years go by now, and fight manager John Davimos approaches Teddy in late 1993 to seek his level of interest in training his rising heavyweight star, Michael Moorer. At the time, Moorer was undefeated and the number one contender in the heavyweight division after already carving out a considerable career as a light heavyweight phenom, winning the WBO title in 1988. Moorer was known to be aloof and had burned bridges with many top trainers owing to his temperament. Trainers with vaunted reputations like Emmanuel Stewart and Lou Duva and even Georgie Benton. They ultimately found it impossible to work with Moorer and conceded their positions. But Teddy, he wasn't fazed. He said, "I had a reputation at that point as a psychological guy, as someone who would stand up to difficult fighters and discipline them and not take any prisoners along the way." So Davimos came to me after Tyson's shocking loss to Buster Douglas in 1990, the heavyweight division, well, it had been opened up. Riddick Bowe, the current world champ, was about to fight a rematch with Evander Holyfield, but with Mike Tyson at least temporarily out of the heavyweight picture because he was serving time in an Indiana penitentiary for the rape of Desiree Washington, Michael Moorer was the next in line. Everyone thought Bowe would knock out Holyfield, and then we would fight Bowe after that. At that point, Bowe was a young, popular champion who a lot of people thought would be around for a long time. But Holyfield shocked everyone by beating Bowe and reclaiming the title. My assessment was that it was probably a good thing for us. Bowe was bigger and stronger, and I thought he'd give us more problems. Moorer matched up well against Holyfield. He was a southpaw, and there had never been a left-handed heavyweight champion before now, and a counterpuncher, and he had a good jab. The question was his character and his mental toughness. He had a history of walking out of training camps, refusing to spar, and drinking too much. I didn't consider him a nut. I knew he had problems, but most of his problems stemmed from the same thing. He was scared, and he was constantly testing people to see whether they were going to be there for him when he needed them. I had heard about some of the things he did. Before one fight, he called up Davimos at 2 a.m. and said, "I'm sitting here in my room drinking a bottle of vodka, and I've got a gun that I'm pointing at my head. Tell me why I shouldn't pull the trigger." Another time, he took a giant Bowie knife and cut his legs up. The scars are still there. The point is, he was a troubled and tortured soul, and now he was going to be asked to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world against a true warrior. When Davimos came to me, I told him that I would meet with Moorer and we'd see how it went. Michael flew into Jersey a few days later. He brought his 4-year-old son with him. Basically, he was using his kid as a security blanket. At least that's how it struck me. When we met, our House of Pancakes in West Orange, we sat in a booth. I didn't waste any time with preliminaries or bullshit. I had done my homework on him and found out some of the things I've just mentioned. So I was prepared. I was armed. I formed a preliminary diagnosis of him, the same way that my father would have done with one of his patients. I noted the symptoms. Now I was ready to conduct a more thorough examination. One thing that struck me right away with Michael was that he had difficulty meeting my eyes. He kept looking down. This was a guy known as a badass and a troublemaker. To me, though, it couldn't have been more obvious what he really was. A scared, insecure guy with an inferiority complex and a fear of what he had to do and had to face. I used the same tactics with him that I had used years earlier with Manny Moore. I told him a story, just like with Manny and his bully. I knew things about Michael that he didn't necessarily know that I knew. I incorporated them into a story so that I could grab his attention in a way that would make an impact, but not be too direct. So this is the story that Teddy told him. He said, "There was one fighter I knew who reminds me a little of you. I'm not going to use his name, but he was an undefeated middleweight who a lot of people thought had a shot to be the world champ." Michael at this point was only half listening, and I thought, I'm going to test him out. And I said, now, this guy had a reputation for being a real badass kind of guy. And when he got closer to a fight, he would go out and start drinking. Well, suddenly, Michael looked up at Teddy. Teddy said to himself, I've got him. I'm on the right track. So as Teddy continued the story, he noticed that every time he touched on something that reminded him of himself, he would get very interested and curious. What it showed Teddy was that he might actually be able to help him. He wouldn't perk up like that or get curious if he didn't care. So Teddy carried on his story. He said, so this guy would go out and drink and do all these things, but he always made sure everybody saw him. Again, Michael looked up. Whether it was him walking out of a sparring session or getting drunk in the nightclub, he made sure everyone was watching. Why would he do that? Michael asked. Because he wanted an excuse to lose. He didn't have the guts to lose on his own. If people saw him out drinking, then they could say that he lost because he didn't care. But the strange part is that later on, he'd sneak into the gym to make up for what he did wrong. He'd sneak in, Michael said. There was a part of him that actually wanted to win. It was kind of like hedging this bet, he might actually have to fight, so maybe that would give him a chance if he was actually in shape. Well, what happened to him, Michael asked. Well, one day he met somebody who understood what he was doing. This guy told him he knew, and he said, now you can't hide no more. I know what you're doing. I know you're sneaking into the gym. If you lose, it's not because you're not in shape, which means either you better quit entirely or start giving yourself reasons to win instead of reasons to lose. Did he quit? Michael asked. He became middleweight champion of the world. Michael took that in. That's for real. Who is he? That's not the point, Teddy said. That's not the point. Okay, so where are we going to train, Teddy? Right here. It's cold here, Michael said. I like to train somewhere warm. I don't care what you like, Teddy said to him. We're training here. What else do you want to know? Well, Maura stared at Teddy, with Atlas returning the curiosity. So Teddy stared right back at him. Maura looked away and started talking to his son, whispering in his ear and hugging him, a kind of comfort blanket. Teddy knew he was right in his assumptions, that Maura was mentally fragile. Cuss, the master of psychology, used to say that when fighters came to the gym, he knew the minute they walked in the door if they had the fortitude to be a fighter. There were 3 flights of steps to get to the place, situated on 14th Street, Manhattan. 3 long flights. Cuss said that as you walked up those steps, you would hear different things at each level. He said, when you got to the first level, you could just start to hear the speed bag. By the second level, you could hear the heavy bag. At the 3rd level, you began to hear people sparring, gloves hitting flesh, grunting. Each level forced you to consider anew whether you wanted to keep going. By the time someone finally came through the door of the gym, Cuss would assess their demeanour, and he said, if they walked in alone, they had a shot. If they walked in with a friend or their father, I didn't want them. To me, if they made that journey up those 3 flights of steps by themselves, they had already exhibited a certain amount of ability to be a fighter. They had shown discipline and control. If they needed someone with them, either I didn't want them, or I said, I got a hell of a job on my hands. Well, Teddy considered Cuss's words from the moment he saw Michael attend with his son, and then again when he utilised his son as an emotional shield to avoid conversing with Teddy. As they continued to discuss the possibility and mechanics of a professional relationship, Maura probed Atlas on his methods. He said, what time am I going to run? 5 in the morning, Teddy said. I always run in the afternoon. You used to run in the afternoon. Why is it so important that I run at 5 in the morning? He asked. Because you don't want to. Michael grunted in complaint and he shook his head a little and he let out the smallest of smiles. Teddy and Michael's first fight together was one that Davimos had already signed, an HBO bout against Mike Evans. If Michael won that, he would get his shot at the title against Evander Holyfield. It was a proverbial banana skin of a fight, eliciting concern for Teddy. He said, if Maura faltered, his opportunity would be lost. Given his psyche, there were compelling reasons to think that he might mess up for precisely that reason, so he wouldn't have to face Holyfield. We trained in West Orange, New Jersey for 7 weeks, and there were days when he would start to get out of the ring right in the middle of a sparring session. When he tried, I put my leg in front of his head, blocking him, and I said, "What are you doing? Your leg's in my way. No, your head's in my way. Get your freaking head back in the ring." He backed down, and he got back in the ring. That was on an easy day. On a tough day, he might refuse to even get in the ring. One time he took off his headgear in the middle of a sparring session and started to climb out between the ropes. I tried to stop him. "Where do you think you're going?" I don't feel good." "Yeah, what's wrong?" "My wrist is sore." He climbed out and tried to move past me, so I grabbed his headgear out of his hand and I threw it across the room. If you don't want to be a fighter, then get out and get out for good. It was a very fine line you had to walk as a trainer. The guy could really be hurting, and if that was the case, it was your responsibility not to get him injured even further. But I had good instincts. I usually knew what I was looking at. My father had been the same way. I remember this time when I was a kid telling him that I was sick and I couldn't go to school. And he'd say, "Your stomach hurts?" Putting his fingers on my stomach. "Yeah, what else do you feel?" And I laid it on thick. A real Academy Award performance, groaning and grimacing as I described my symptoms. When I was finished, he looked at me and he said, "All right, now get dressed and go to school." That's how he was with me and Michael. I knew when it was real and when it was a lie. I knew he was trying to escape. I wouldn't let him. He had been getting away with this crap his whole life. I knew if I let him slide even one time, I'd lose my authority. I knew no matter what his actions showed, that in the end, he didn't want to face his fears. He just needed some help. Still, there were times when we'd leave a training session barely speaking to each other, or with me having nearly threatened him. Then later that night, 10 or 11 o'clock, he'd call me and he'd say, "Are we okay?" Because he was afraid that he might have lost me, that maybe I wasn't coming back into the gym the next day. He didn't understand how I was built, that my not coming in would have been like my father not showing up at his office or not going out on house calls when needed. For my part, I couldn't comprehend him feeling that way at first, but then I remembered something that Davimos had told me, that all the other guys, Benton, Stewart, Duver, they'd left him. Every one of them had left, just like his father had left him when he was a kid. And then it made sense. Atlas and Mora successfully negotiated their way through the training camp, and Double M won the Evans fight, albeit in unconvincing fashion. In the dressing room prior to the fight, Mora demanded silence. He tried to sleep. Teddy was convinced that this was an example of a man going into his shell, trying to avoid thinking about the fight. Coming out of the dressing room, Teddy tried to motivate his man, to little avail. Mora was lethargic and zombie-like in the ring. Teddy said the lesson wasn't lost on me. It has also occurred to me that I was less focused at the time than I should have been. Looking back now, it seems entirely possible. My father had died 2 weeks before the day of the fight. 3 months earlier, at the age of 88, Teddy Sr. had opted for a hip replacement, failing to consider the risks presented by his advanced years. The pain in his joint trumped consideration of any risk. Doctors advised him that surgery was a poor avenue to explore, though Theodore was a headstrong man. The surgery was carried out on a Friday, the 13th, 1993, causing worry for his superstitious son. "What are you getting an operation on Friday the frickin' 13th for?" Well, Theodore was unnerved. He said, "What difference does it make?" "Do it some other day." Theodore didn't relent though. "No, it's a good day. As good a day as any." The surgery was a success. The next day, an intern stopped by his room. The main doctors were gone for the weekend, and Theodore calmly told him, "Give me 100 cc's of heparin." The intern resisted. "I can't do that. You've just had an operation." "I'm having a heart attack," Theodore exclaimed. "So you're going to have to give it me." "But you can't take that," the intern said. The drug being requested was an anticoagulant that was used to counter heart attacks, but it would also have thinned the blood and quite possibly have led to a hemorrhage in his hip. "Listen," Teddy insisted, "if you don't give me what I'm asking for, I'll have a massive heart attack and die in 2 or 3 hours. "Dr. Atlas," the intern said, "I really think what you're feeling is just anxiety from the operation." "I don't have anxiety," replied Teddy Sr. "I've never had anxiety." The intern stood nervously. "Let me put it another way. If you were fixing a car and you were going to do something that would destroy the brakes, but if you didn't do it, the engine would be ruined. You'd give up the brakes. Now you're right to worry about the hemorrhaging. I might die from hemorrhaging, but I'll definitely die from a heart attack if you don't do what I say. I'm sorry, the intern said, but I disagree with your diagnosis. The intern refused to administer the heparin. 3 hours later, as though Nostradamus himself had declared it, Theodore suffered a massive heart attack. Teddy recited the circumstances following the affair. He said, I got there late that night. My mother called me and I went straight to the hospital. I was upset, obviously, but I didn't let anyone see. My father had never wanted any of us to show any emotion. I walked into the hospital room and he was on a ventilator. Like I said, he was a tough bastard. The heart attack hadn't killed him. With the help of a ventilator, he hung on for months. I was there with him every day, for hours, half asleep, walking the halls. He was a medical marvel. I'd hear doctors going, boy, that guy's incredible. Can you believe he's still alive? At first, I didn't even realise it was him they were talking about. It was like a scene in The Godfather with Brando. He took 8 shots, and he's still alive, that son of a bitch. Eventually, I put things together. As far as what happened to him, my mother and sister had been in the room at the time, so I got the information from them. No one else in my family really wanted to deal with it. This was the hospital my father had founded and loved. But what had happened made me furious. I went right to the director of the hospital and I said, your doctor's killed him. He said, Teddy, I think you're overreacting. Don't tell me I'm fucking overreacting. Your incompetence is going to cost this doctor, my father, his life. They were afraid I was going to sue the hospital, but in the end, I couldn't do it. It was his hospital, and I couldn't do it. He stayed alive for 3 months. He couldn't talk, but he understood everything, and he could write things down in this scribble on a pad. One day, he indicated to me that he wanted all the medicines that were on the intravenous, and there must have been 20 of them. Turned around so that he could see what they were, and he pointed a finger towards his eyes, and I got his glasses, and I put them on him. Then he motioned that he wanted the IV rolled closer, so I rolled it closer, and he pointed at one of the medicines, and he nodded at me. I called in a nurse, and I said to her, one of these medicines is wrong. Honey, your father is under a lot of medication. No, I'm telling you, one of the medicines is wrong. Please call the pharmacist downstairs and have him check it. So she called the pharmacist, and he looked up in his book, and he told her, he's right. Get him off it right away. He's right. My father nodded at me, a slight smile, and it was like I was transported back to being a kid again, going out on house calls with him. I was so proud to be connected to him. It was equal to being in the dugout watching Mickey Mantle hit home runs or on the court as Michael Jordan drove the baseline. I was right there. I was a part of it. It was just me and him, my childhood hero, on the field together. Only here, he was doing it on his deathbed. It was an excruciating 3 months, but awe-inspiring too, watching him die, seeing his strong, clear mind refuse to capitulate. A week or so before his kidneys shut down, I was in his room discussing his treatment with the doctors. My father was listening, and he shook his head. Ted, Dr. Caracter said to him, you've got to stop being a doctor. You're a terrible patient. We're the doctors. But my father shook his head again. I brought him the pad, and he wrote something down. I showed it to Caracter. Caracter replied, Ted, that's only if you have kidney problems. And you don't have any kidney problems. 5 days later, my father's kidneys failed. I guess he knew. Even he couldn't come back from that. When nobody was in the room, he pulled out all his tubes. Shortly after he did that, he went into a coma. After hearing about it, Jerry Eisenberg, a writer for the Newark Star-Ledger, did a story about my father's life called The Real Root of Toughness. I took it with me the next time I went to the hospital and read it to him. My father always hated to hear things about himself. He'd never allow it. But now lying there, all the machines and tubes hooked back up to him, he couldn't stop me or say shut up. The thrust of the story was that the guys you think of when you think of tough guys like Mike Tyson weren't really that tough. If you wanted tough, you had to hear about this doctor in Staten Island. The story ended with Eisenberg quoting me. It was strange when I reached that part because I was reading about myself aloud in the third person. You want to know about tough? Do you realise how many times he could have quit? He's the toughest man I ever met. He's my father, and I love him. I lowered the newspaper and looked at the body on the hospital bed. My father's eyes were shut. You could barely see his breath move in his chest. The monitors pulsed, indicating he was still alive. But there were no other obvious signs of life. Yet the only way I could tell him I loved him was to read it to him, out loud, from a story in the newspaper. Only then could I say the words, when he wasn't awake or aware that I was saying them. Theodore inspired his son. Teddy continued training throughout the harrowing escapade of his life because that's what his father would have done. Teddy was working with Michael Moorer and another promising heavyweight, Shannon Briggs from Brooklyn. Briggs had a fight down in Atlantic City. A few days he embarked for the fight. Briggs caught a code and decided he wanted to back out of the fight. Teddy convinced him otherwise. He knew Briggs was just looking for an excuse to pull out and he wanted to deny him that excuse. The day of the fight, a Wednesday, Teddy spent the morning with Theodore in hospital before driving down to Atlantic City. He knew there was a good chance that his father wouldn't make it and survive the night, but he felt it proper to honour his duty to Briggs. During the first couple of rounds of the fight, Briggs was drifted and unfocused, though Teddy lambasted him. Ever the motivational force, Briggs got the KO in the third round. But tragedy struck soon after. Teddy said, I talked to my mother afterward. My father was still hanging in. Just after I fell asleep about 3 a.m, the phone rang, and I knew, before I answered, what it meant. It was weird. Thursday had always been the one day a week my father didn't have office hours. It was just like him to wait until his day off to die. After the call, I showered and got dressed. Then I got in the car with Elaine and the kids. They had all come with me, and we drove back to Staten Island at 4 a.m. My whole family was there, my brother Terrell, and my sister and my mother. I helped with the arrangements, and later that same morning, the wake wasn't until the next day, I went to the gym to train Moorer. Michael came into the gym. He said he didn't feel like training, and I said to him, go get dressed, put your shoes on, and get ready to work. Oh, I'm tired and I'm sore. I need a day off, Teddy. This was after I'd already been through all kinds of this bullshit with him, so he was a little bit less forceful than he would have been a few weeks earlier when I practically smacked his head into a wall. It's just a day, he said. What's the big deal? Just a day? Just a fucking day? I was livid, which probably wasn't fair. He had no idea what had happened. You're supposed to be a professional. If you win this fight, you're going to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. Just a day? Don't you understand anything about commitment, about being a pro, about sticking with what you say you want to be? You don't do it just when you feel good. You don't do it just when you're not tired. You don't do it just when it's sunny. You do it every day of your life. You do it when it hurts to do it, when it's the last thing in the world you want to do, when there are a million reasons not to do it. You do it because you're a professional. I didn't scream. I just said these things quietly and firmly. And when I was finished, Michael looked at me and said, I'll go get dressed. That night, John Davimos called Michael and told him that my father had died. Michael immediately called me at home. Why didn't you tell me your father had died, he said. I don't know. There was no reason to tell you. You shouldn't have come to the gym. We didn't have to train. You've got a fight in 2 weeks. But your father died. It's two separate things. I'm sorry, he said. There's nothing to be sorry about, Teddy said. When you're doing something you believe in, when you're committed to something, you do what you need to do. I'll see you tomorrow, Michael. Michael's response was, you sure there's nothing I can do? Teddy said, well, besides showing up on time, no. Now, in the weeks that followed the Evans fight, Michael Moorer reverted to form, eating too much and drinking heavily, falling back on to old bad habits. With the Holyfield fight looming, the prognosis veered towards the negative. Once a date was set for the fight, a week-long publicity tour was arranged by TVKO and HBO. Teddy decided to set up a pre-camp for Michael in West Orange, New Jersey prior to starting his main training camp, with the rationale being that he would drive discipline into Mora. Teddy planned for Michael to stay 5 days at the minicamp, but after 2 days he informed Teddy that he was leaving. Teddy said, "Wednesday morning I was in the gym, waiting for him to come in, and he called and said, 'I'm leaving, I'm going.' 'What are you freaking talking about? I'm here in the gym waiting for you.' 'No, I'm leaving, I'm going home.' 'No, you're not,' said Teddy. 'You're coming in.' 'I got a plane to catch, I'll talk to you later,' Michael replied, and he hung up. Teddy was stunned, although when he gathered his thoughts he realised it was almost predictable, so he got in his car and drove straight over to his hotel, which wasn't as easy as it might sound. Teddy didn't even know where he was staying. He wound up having to call John Davimos to find out. When he arrived at Michael's room, Flem opened the door. Michael had his clothes laid out on the bed. He was packing his bag. "Michael, do you think I'm joking about this? You think this is a fucking joke?" "You ain't going to tell me what to do, Teddy. I'm leaving," was the response from Michael. Teddy said, "Yeah? Then you're going to have to find yourself a new trainer." Teddy looked over, but there was no assistance from Flem. He liked Flem, but in most instances he was just Michael's yes man. He was there to protect him and support him in whatever he wanted to do. Unfortunately, like a lot of guys who are captured by the glamour of professional athletes, Flem had sold himself out a little, compromised his own dignity to be in that world. Michael kept folding shirts and laying them into his travel bag. "You think I'm fucking kidding?" said Teddy. "I'm going back to the gym now. You don't follow me, you won't be the only one packing your bag." So Teddy turned round and walked out. He drove back to the gym. When 20 minutes had passed and Michael hadn't shown up, he called Davimos, and he told Davimos what was going on, and Michael was skipping out. Of course, John Davimos wasn't surprised. "He's done this before, Teddy. There's nothing you can do about it. You're right about him. He's scared." Listening to someone else express it, Teddy got worked up all over again. "What flight is he on?" Teddy asked. "American flight 142, was the response. Well, Teddy was stubborn, and he just couldn't let him go without trying one more time to make him understand what he was doing. So he got in his car, he sped over to Newark Airport. It probably took him 20 minutes. He arrived at the terminal and found Flem doing all the grunt work, checking the bags and doing the tickets, while Michael sat there like a spoiled athlete. So Teddy walked up to him, angry, but he tried to contain it. He said, "You think I don't know what you're doing? I know exactly what you're doing, and you're not going to get me to go along with it. You think I'm going to let you frickin' dictate what we do? That we're not going to train here now, and you then think I'm going to go and train you somewhere else later on, and you get ready to fight Holyfield, and watch you make more excuses not to win?" Well, Flem wandered back over to where they were, and Michael rose to his feet. "There'll be plenty of time to train later on," he said. "Bullshit," Teddy's response was. "Will you listen to yourself? You're afraid of fighting this fight. What do you want? Somebody who will lie to you and let you lie? Is that what you want? Well, fine then. Go and get somebody else, because it ain't going to be me. I'm telling you, Michael, I'd have to let you take my manhood away for that to happen. For me to let you do what you want to do, I'd have to give up my manhood, and I'm not doing that. I ain't giving it away." Well, Mora was dumbfounded, not knowing how to respond. He simply nodded to Flem, and they began walking away towards the gate. "You walk," Teddy yelled after him. "You're going to keep walking." He kept walking, and a while later, Teddy called Davimos, telling him he was quitting his work with Mora. At home, Elaine was in the kitchen of the Atlas's tiny apartment making lunch for the kids when Teddy returned. "You're home early," she said. A lot of times in the past, Teddy hadn't revealed much surrounding what was going on with his work life. With Tyson, with LaLonde, he acted upon his needs and stayed silent. This time, however, he felt he owed his wife more consideration. The family was depending on the Holyfield fight due to its considerable financial implications. Teddy was slated to make $200,000. "I had to walk away," Teddy explained. "What?" His wife nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Michael wasn't listening to me. He wouldn't do what I wanted to do, so I quit." "Again, Teddy," said Elaine, with an almost mocking tone to her voice. The look on Elaine's face in that moment, the way she said again, well, it really got to Teddy, and he said, "In that moment, I questioned whether it was a matter of principle and honour that I was acting on, or whether it was just selfishness and pride." Suddenly, I was unsure, and then almost instantly I felt myself getting angry with her. It was unnerving. My responsibility to her and my family had clouded the truth and the purity of the decision I had made. A decision that had felt right at the time. But now, weighed against the disappointment in her face, it seemed wrong. It was nearly unbearable, the clash of opposing feelings. I couldn't allow myself to think that I had done the wrong thing, and yet at the same time, I didn't want to be angry with her for being disappointed in me. I turned and I walked out of the kitchen. The next few days, not surprisingly, were pretty tense. I was sure that I'd done the right thing, but Elaine's disappointment was palpable, and that made things very difficult. I was almost relieved when I had to leave to take Shannon Briggs to Biloxi, Mississippi for a fight there. The night before the fight, Shannon and Mark Roberts, his manager, and one of his guys, Troy, and I went to eat dinner in a joint at Biloxi called the Bombay Bicycle Club. It was close to our motel, along one of those stretches of highway that made up motels and fast food restaurants, and we parked the car in the lot off the side, and Shannon, Troy and Mark started walking towards the front entrance. I was about 15 steps behind them, thinking my own thoughts, not really tuned in, except that suddenly I was aware of these voices and this harsh laughter. Someone saying in an ugly drunken twang, "What the fuck is that on your head, boy? What kind of monkey are you?" Even then, it took me a second to realise that it was directed at my guys, that it was a racial thing because Shannon had these dyed orange dreadlocks that he sometimes tied up in a pile on top of his head. The three of them, Shannon, Troy and Mark, were by the door of the restaurant up this set of steps. There were these other guys standing there and words being exchanged. I started up the steps and I could see Shannon trying to get past these guys to go into the restaurant. One of the guys, the biggest one, a muscular bruiser with long hair and a beard in an oil-stained gimme cap, stepped in his way. "Where do you think you're going?" he said. Then he shoved Shannon, who fell back into me. "You better go back to where you came from, boy." The rest of them laughed. I stepped past Shannon and got right in the face of this guy who had pushed him. "Who the fuck are you talking to?" "Why? You gonna do something?" "They ain't gonna do nothing. You gonna do something?" "Yeah, I sure am." And I cracked him, one on the jaw. One of his friends came at me, and I turned and cracked him. Then the first guy grabbed hold of me, and he was big. He pulled me towards him. We started to fall backward towards the stairs. As we started to fall, I heard Shannon scream, "Teddy!" like he thought I was going to get hurt. But as I was falling, I twisted the big guy around and fell on top of him. We crashed down the stairs, and his big body cushioned my fall. All my weight was on him, and his head slammed against the ground and cracked wide open. I was able to get right up, but he was out, unconscious and bleeding. Then these other guys came out of the restaurant, and it turned into a brawl. Mark and Troy stayed off to the side, but Shannon joined in, and we busted up a bunch of them. We worked our way back to the parking lot. I said to Mark, "Get Shannon in the frickin' car and get him out of here." He was my fighter, and my instinct was to protect him and get him out of there. While I was holding these guys at bay, I told Mark and Shannon to take off. Shannon didn't want to, but Mark pushed him into the car, and they drove away. Troy and Teddy made their way back to the road with a couple of their tormentors in tow. They were bolder, and now that there was just Teddy and Troy. The two men were walking towards a gas station down the road, with the pursuers were about 50 feet behind them. Troy was nervous, and he said, "Ted, they're following us." "Slow down, let them catch up. They're coming after us. I'm just leading them to where I want them. They got anything in their hands?" Troy looked back. Teddy, not wanting the reminder, "No, Troy." "Good," Teddy replied. It was very calm, and it reassured the anxious Troy. They led the men to a dim area, just beyond the proximity of the gas station, away from the backup. Teddy said, "We were out of sight of the roadhouse. They were right behind us now. I could hear them saying things, 'Motherfucker this,' and 'nigger that.' Suddenly, I turned around. 'Yeah, motherfucker, I'm a motherfucker.' I walked right towards them, and they weren't expecting it. They were taken off guard. I hit one of the guys so hard, I thought I might have killed him. I dropped him with one shot. The other guy, when I started towards him, took off. Troy said, 'Oh, shit, come on, let's get out of here.' So we started across the street towards our hotel, which wasn't more than a couple of 100 yards away. All of a sudden, I noticed that a car full of them had pulled in front of us. I could see one of the guys was on a radio. Then another car came. I realised they were talking to each other on their CBs. They were calling across all their friends to come over. I tried to stay calm. "Come on," I said to Troy, leading him across the street, but away from our hotel. "Where are we going?" he said. "Well, the hotel's there." "No, we can't let us go back to there. We'll be cornered." We started jogging through people's yards, circling back around until we could enter the hotel from the back. When we got there, the whole place was lit up with headlights and the spinning lights of cop cars. We managed to sneak up to our room unseen, and we kept the lights off inside, peeking through the curtain. The whole place was cordoned off and surrounded by the police. We looked down through the curtain, and we could see them go into the main office. Then they brought out the manager. He had a ring of keys in his hand. We had rented 4 rooms, and we saw them heading towards the stairs leading to our rooms. The cops had the guns out. Troy, at this point, was losing it, saying, "We better go. We better get out. Let's get out, Teddy." "No, we can't. We can't get out," was the reply. I looked out past the curtain. Down below was one of the guys I'd beaten up at the restaurant. It was the one who'd cracked his head on the stairs. "Shit. They're friends with the cops," I said. "You go out now, and who knows what they're going to do." A couple of cops started up the stairs toward us. I heard them go in the room next door. Their voices raised, things banging around. A moment later, I saw them bring Shannon and Mark down the stairs. "Oh my God," Troy said. When I peeked out again, a few of the cops were standing down below with Shannon and Mark. Another group headed back upstairs towards our room. Troy, well, he was practically crying. "Listen," I said, "lay down in the tub behind the shower curtain and don't make a sound. If they come in here, chances are that I'm the one they're looking for. I'm the one who did all the damage. I'll just let them take me. Then you can come out later." He agreed and got into the tub. I could hear the cops approaching our room. Just before footsteps reached our door, they stopped. Someone was yelling something. A minute went past, and nothing happened. I peeked out through the curtains again. Now I saw an amazing thing. Les Bonanno, the former police chief of New Orleans, who was one of the fight promoters, was down in the courtyard talking to the head police officer. It was like the cavalry had arrived. Les and the head cop kept talking. Les gesturing to Shannon and Mark while the other cops stood next to them holding shotguns. Finally, the talking was finished. All the cops started leaving, heading towards the cars. Only after they drove off did I go out. Mark and Shannon couldn't believe it when they saw me. "We thought they'd got you for sure," Shannon said. "We didn't know what to think. Where's Troy?" At that moment, Troy came out of the room. It was almost comical, the way he slunk out. The 4 of us were nearly giddy with relief. "We fucked those crackers up," Shannon said. We all congratulated each other and compared stories. Apparently the guys we'd beat up had told the police that we had guns, and the cops would have gotten us for sure if Les hadn't shown up and explained the situation, that we were boxers, there for a prize fight. They hadn't believed that we could beat all those guys up with just our fists. But when he explained everything, how we didn't have guns, they left. Overnight, the story turned into legend. We went to the weigh-in the next day. The building was packed. Everyone knew about what had happened. All those old Southern guys who were the commissioners, they all heard. We were treated like celebrities. This one guy, Billy Lyons, a real character, about 70 years old and from a family of Confederates and slave owners, said to me, "We heard you tussled with some of our boys. Just wanted to let you know, we're with you. We're behind you. If there are any problems, you let me know." The details of the incident got a little bit exaggerated. We'd beaten up 8, maybe 10 guys. Tommy Morrison, who was fighting on the same card, came over to us and said, 10 guys had you cornered. Man. Shannon Briggs told everyone, all his friends, and the story made it all the way to Michael Moore in Detroit. By then it was, "Hey, Teddy kicked the shit out of like 20 rednecks. He knocked out 10 of them. 2 of them died." The day of Shannon's fight, I got a call from Michael. "Hey, Teddy, I heard about the crazy shit that happened. You said the word, and I'll come down with the boys. We'll get on a plane." You have to understand how Michael's mind worked. He heard what I'd done, and he wished he'd been there. It was like all the stuff I'd been saying to him wasn't just talking. It meant something. He called me up, and I could hear it in his voice. He wanted to be a part of it. I'm coming down with my boys. For what? I said. You got a problem. We'll be right there. The only problem, I said, is if you come down and I have to see your face. He didn't get it. He thought he could just call me up like everything was okay and nothing had ever happened between us. You really kicked some ass, he said. Oh, if I were there, oh boy, we would have been doing some business. Oh yeah? Yeah, okay, whatever. I wanted to get off the phone at this point. I gotta go, I said to him. I talked to Emmanuel Stewart. Good. I told you he wouldn't train me no more. That's right. So I start training with Emmanuel in 2 weeks. Good, Teddy replied. Well, I've got to go now. He wouldn't let the call end. So how's your son? Good. How's your family? How's your wife? Everyone okay? Michael, listen. I don't want to talk. I've got to go now. I don't want to talk no more. Teddy, I need you to train me. Michael, you've already made your choice. Please, he said. I need you. There's no one else who can do the job. You're the only one, Teddy. No, I said. I'm not going to do it. And it's at this point, ladies and gentlemen, where we will pause for the end of part 3, leading in to part 4 and the final part of Teddy Atlas's career profile. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. There's been some great stories around his relationship with Donny LaLonde and how that fell apart. His great stories around training Willem DaFoe and being a part of that particular movie. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've not seen that movie. It does make me want to go out and watch that movie. Definitely learned some great stuff on Teddy Atlas's career about what he's done so far. And of course, we're ending it at a point where we are leading into the Michael Moorer, Evander Holyfield fight and the remainder of Teddy's career to date. So, in the next episode, the final chapter of the Teddy Atlas career profile, we will be talking about his relationship with Michael Moorer. We will be talking about his relationship with the likes of Alexander Gerdvik and Timothy Bradley, his infamous fireman speech. We can't wait to get that out there as well. But that will be the final chapter of Teddy Atlas's career profile. If you've enjoyed part 3, please do let us know on social media. You can find us on X at career_profiles or at BTR Boxing Pod. If you're on all other social platforms, it's a BTR Boxing Podcast. I want to say thank you for all the comments as well on Spotify, because it's really appreciated. I do say it at the start and end of every episode, but the more of you that are doing it, it's really great to hear that you're enjoying the fact that we're breaking this down into segments so that we don't skimp on some of the stories. And it's really hard to leave out some of these great stories, because if we just did it in 1, maybe 2 parts, we'd have to cut out a load of the stories. And I think when we're putting it into smaller chunks, it's really giving you a full picture of someone like a Teddy Atlas. And, you know, when we do the rest of the season and you hear the rest of the season, you'll understand why we wanted to do it in longer parts for each individual that we're covering, because of the fact that there's some great stories out there and we don't want to remiss them. We want to try and give you a true, definitive career profile on these individuals. Again, a big thanks has to go out to the patrons of BTR Boxing Podcast Network. You've had this episode earlier than the rest of the world as a result of being a member on patreon.com. You've got this completely ad-free, and you get this early access. You get, obviously, the extra stuff that we're putting on there and the stuff that me and Jamie are now doing as well. So if you're not a patron and you want to check us out and you want to support us as well, importantly, if you want to support us and allow us to continue to start investing into new equipment, because we're looking at getting big backdrops and we're looking at getting a new professional camera to use that attaches to the professional microphones that we've got. We're essentially trying to set up our own little studio, because that's what we want to take going forward with these shows. So please, if you are in a position where you can support us, check us out at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast. But if you can't, continue to comment on Spotify, continue to share, like the post on social media. All of them necessaries are also just as helpful, because they are letting people know that we are out here, that we've got some great content, we've got some great evergreen content out there, loads of episodes of career profiles and legendary nights and darker side of boxing. So continue to let people know where we're at, continue to share it on social media. It's truly appreciated. Well, that is it for this episode. This has been part 3 of the Teddy Atlas career profile on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.